Do you like Boris Johnson?
No.
Why not?
Because he's like a self-righteous, pompous, Etonian, totally out of touch with everyone, hideous human being.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, she's certainly not impressed by Boris Johnson, but in a few weeks' time, he will be the UK's next Prime Minister, barring any last-minute catastrophes, of course. And there have been plenty in his life, enough lies, cheating, cover-ups to sink any normal person's career. But Boris is far from normal. He always bounces back. Politician, journalist, husband. Boris Johnson's had calamities in every category. Yet somehow he always gets another chance. As a journalist, he was fired by The Times for fabricating a quote for his first front-page story.
He's fired!
The Times let you go after you made up a quote. Why did you make up a quote?
Well, this again, you know, these are big terms for what happened. Well, I can tell you the whole thing. I mean, I think are you sure our viewers wouldn't want to hear more about?
Well, all right. If you don't want to talk about the made-up quote.
But the well-connected Boris quickly got a job at The Telegraph, where he filed so-called Euromyth articles from Brussels about how the EU was plotting to ban prawn cocktail crisps. Stuff like that. As a politician, he was fired again, this time from the shadow cabinet for lying to his party's leader about his extramarital affair.
Why did you lie to your party?
Well, I mean, with great respect, on that, I never had any conversation with Michael Howard about that matter, and, I don't
You did lie.
propose... Well, I don't propose to go into all that again.
I don't blame you.
12 years later, Theresa May appointed him Foreign Secretary, and he promptly put his foot in it when he said a British-Iranian woman being held prisoner in Iran had been teaching journalism. She hadn't, and he'd only made things worse.
My point was that I disagreed with the Iranian view that training journalists was a crime. Not that I wanted to lend any credence to Iranian allegations that Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe had been engaged in such activity. I accept that my remarks could have been clearer in that respect.
As a husband, turmoil. He's had numerous affairs and even a child out of wedlock. He'll soon be divorcing for the second time, perhaps to marry his mistress, who's 24 years his junior. In the recent past, such scandals and gaffes would have spelt the end of a political career. But today, the British appear to be more relaxed, intoxicated by Boris's elite cocktail of Latin-laced rhetoric and childish antics.
What do you think it represents?
Well, to me, it looks like the tip of a gigantic cocktail stick that's emerging through the integuments of a super colossal pickled onion.
You see, we spend the entire report pointing out Boris's failings, and then he uses a word like integuments, and all is forgiven. That is the Boris charm. Let's bring in our panel now. We have, up there in the top left, we have Simon Marks. He's the Washington-based journalist. We'll be discussing the prospect of Trump and Boris working together. A certain kind of duo there. On the right, we have Mohammed Amin, who says after 36 years, he'll quit the Conservative Party if Boris becomes PM. And finally, Freddie Gray, who works at Boris's old paper, The Spectator. Now, the question today, is Boris Johnson fit to be Prime Minister? Freddie, you've actually met him. You work at his old paper. What do you think?
Well, I think he has many flaws. I mean, that's obvious. He's a flawed moral being. But I tend to think politicians are all flawed moral beings, and they all lie, or they're at least dishonest.
Yeah.
And I think, given the situation the country is in, it's quite a good moment for Boris Johnson.
But Freddie, I mean, to the extent that he lies and gets into little misdemeanours, at the Times, he lied and was sacked. The shadow cabinet, he lied and he was sacked. In his personal life, he cheats and lies. And he even had a child out of wedlock. A few years ago, that would have disqualified a person from trying to seek the highest office in the land.
Well, I would like morally upstanding leaders in an ideal world, but I do think British society has changed on this. And I think it's odd that a lot of the people who are most angry at Boris's private life couldn't care less when it applies to other politicians. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn has had quite a colourful history with women, but we never talk about him as a womanizer in the way we do about Boris.
It's hard to imagine, but Freddie, do you think he gets away with it because of his elite background and because of his charm?
I don't know about the elite background. I think that probably counts against him, but the charm certainly helps him a lot. I mean, he's able to establish connections with people, and people warm to him. A lot of people in London don't warm to him about Brexit, but outside of London, he's a very popular figure.
Oh, I can tell you who doesn't warm to him. Mohammed Amin doesn't warm to him. 36 years, you've been a member of the Conservative Party, and no matter who's been at the head, you've stuck with them. But this time it's different. Why?
That's right. There's a basic level of integrity and honesty that you expect in a leader. And my fundamental problem with Mr. Johnson is that he doesn't meet that level of integrity. It's nothing to do with his private life. I don't care about his adultery. What concerns me is his regular untruths in public life. And he's got to the stage where I formed the view that I don't think he really cares anymore, rather like Mr. Trump, whether what he's saying is true or false. And let me give you an example. About a year ago, he stood on a platform at JCB in front of the media and said categorically that he never said that Turkey was joining the EU during the EU referendum campaign. Half an hour later, there were clips all over Twitter of him saying precisely that many times during the referendum campaign. And I don't think his memory has suddenly failed him. I think he says things that occur to him on the spur of the moment without worrying about whether they're true or false.
Simon, you've been a journalist for years, and as we just heard in that report, he was fired from the Times for fabricating a quote. In journalistic circles, that is a cardinal sin, and I'm just going to ask you, would you trust him as a journalistic colleague, let alone as Prime Minister of the country?
Well, look, I think he'd certainly be a very entertaining journalistic colleague, Matthew. There's no question about that. He's proved that on numerous occasions in the past, even if in journalistic life as well as political life, he plays fast and loose with the facts. Look, I haven't lived in the UK for the best part of a quarter of a century. I've been on this side of the Atlantic. I find it hard to pick up on what Freddie was saying, that morality has changed so much in the UK that the British public writ large are necessarily ready for a prime minister who can't actually even identify publicly how many children he's fathered. I mean, that's quite a substantial stretch from where the country was just a few years ago.
OK, thank you, Simon. You know, we've had a couple of examples of Boris's dodgy dealings in that last report, and there are many, many more. Here's a recorded conversation of his old Eton and Oxford friend Darius Guppy, asking him to supply the address of a journalist so that he could have him beaten up.
How badly are you going to hurt this guy? Not badly at all. I want to know. Okay, let me explain this. If this guy is serious, I'm curious. I guarantee you, he will not be serious. How badly will he be? He will not have a broken limb or broken arm. He will not be put into intensive care or anything like that. He will probably get a couple of black eyes and a cracked rib or something like that. Nothing which you didn't suffer in rugby, okay? But he'll get scared, and that's what I want him to do. I want him to get scared. I want him to have no idea who's behind it, okay? Sorry, if I get You will not, Boris. I swear to you. If you knew... I'm not scared. I just got this bloody number for you. Okay, Derry. I said I'll do it. Don't worry. Boris, I really mean it. I love you.
Back to Freddie now. Freddie, I know he wanted to help out an old friend, and this happened 30 years ago, but doesn't that show the weakness of the man?
Well, I really think we need to be a little bit careful about doing what I'd call Boris fake news, which is, you know, that was a conversation in which he's clearly trying to stop his very angry friend from going and beating someone up. And he doesn't entirely stop him, but it's a private conversation that was recorded.
But Freddie, he was prepared to give the address, and admittedly that the assault didn't happen, but he did show willingness.
I think, again, this is really quite silly. That was not a kind of him giving the order to beat someone up, as you might portray it. It was him talking to a very, very angry friend in a private conversation. I think we have to be a little bit careful about playing into a kind of fake news about Boris that most people look at and think, actually, he's fine. Because if you want to hurt Boris, I would stick to things that are real and political and not just sort of silly things he may have said in private.
Simon, come in.
20 or 30 years ago.
Well, but if we do that, though, Freddie and Matthew, we go back to Boris Johnson at the age of 6, don't we? The man who basically, as a young boy, decided that he wanted to be Prime Minister, but didn't really know why he wanted to be Prime Minister or what he wanted to accomplish. And in many ways, you can surely draw a line from that 6-year-old boy to Boris Johnson today. It's very unclear what his political philosophy or political ideology is. He wasn't even sure which side he was going to come down on the Brexit debate until the last possible minute. Now he's seen as the crusader who's going to salvage the British conundrum. I mean, what does he actually stand for?
Freddie?
I disagree that I think his political philosophy is quite clear, actually. He's a classical liberal and he's a libertarian. He's even a bit of a libertine. But he is not, where he always tends to side is against the state and in favour of the individual. I think his political philosophy is actually quite clear.
Mohammed, I think you'd probably agree with Simon Marks that he is actually a political opportunist and has been, he was looking since he was a child for power for the sake of power and not principle.
Absolutely. When I listen to Boris Johnson speak, I never know what it is that he really believes. The one thing I'm sure of is that Boris believes that he should be Prime Minister, but beyond that, I have no clue what he stands for. I have no idea whether he will get us out of the European Union or change his mind and decide that we should remain. He has zero credibility.
Freddie, to come back to you for a moment, you talked about his actual performance in the job as opposed to the salacious stuff. Well, let's talk about that. As Foreign Secretary, what he said about the British Iranian woman held prisoner or in a prison in Iran was a disaster, wasn't it?
I think that was a setback. I'm not sure whether what he said actually made any difference, and I think it detracted from the real problem there, which is an Iranian regime that holds people prisoners for not very good reason. I think in terms of his performance as Foreign Secretary, I think it's worth noting that he was put in a very difficult position because his Prime Minister briefed against him, the Prime Minister's team briefed against him on a regular basis. And I think he was sort of set up to fail as Foreign Secretary. And actually, I think he held up pretty well, given what he was facing.
OK, well, we'll leave it there for a moment. For all his failings, he can always say that he won 2 terms as London's mayor and helped to bring the Olympic Games to the city.
I took this city through riots and strikes and all the teething problems of the Olympics, which was actually no picnic, as I remember. We cut the murder rate by 50%, cut road traffic fatalities by 50%. What I want to do now, with your help, is to do for the whole country what we did in London.
Well, clearly Boris looks back at his time as London mayor with fondness, but do Londoners still love him? Despite all the scandals, we sent our reporter, Asad Beg, to the streets of London on his bike to find out.
The people of London love to cycle, and the bike I'm on is still known as a Boris bike, one of the many popular initiatives that he is credited with introducing. So what better way to get around and ask if the gaffe-prone politician's charm still works on the streets here? My first stop is the richest borough in the city to see if affluent Londoners still support Bojo. What do you think of Boris Johnson?
Good bloke.
Good bloke? What do you think about Boris Johnson?
He's a
I think he's quite charismatic.
Yeah.
The hair helps, I think.
How about his personal life? Does that bother you?
No, it's not relevant.
What about all these gaffes?
Makes life interesting. Makes politics interesting.
Do you like him?
No.
Why not?
He doesn't tell the truth. How about Brexit? I mean, that bus for a start.
He's got a support. So I think when you have the support, then he's the right guy.
I know that lots of people don't like him.
Why do you think lots of people don't like him?
Because he says dumb stuff.
We got our own problems with our guy too, though, so.
Your guy likes our guy.
I know it, which makes him even worse.
Not my guy, I don't know. I'm impartial.
He's like a normal person. He's, all right, he's got the high life, he's been to obviously the posh schools, but he's a down-to-earth person.
Why is it that people like him? Why do
because
you
he's
like
a maverick like myself.
A maverick? Maybe. Polarising? Definitely. From upmarket Chelsea, I made my way to the more diverse Whitechapel to find out what the locals there thought about their potential PM. Hi guys, what do you think of Boris Johnson?
He's a mate.
Do you like Boris Johnson?
No, mate.
Put that to the camera. Look, man.
I think people find him funny. I think he's different.
He's a bad man, like a Trump.
He's a bad man, like
Yeah, he doesn't like the Muslim people.
He's a liar. He lied. You know, when the Brexit happens, everything he said was a lie.
Do you like Boris Johnson?
No.
Why not?
Because he's like a self-righteous, pompous, Etonian, totally out of touch with everyone, hideous human being.
But he's going to be the next Prime Minister.
I know, it makes me really sad.
You could be the next Prime Minister.
Yeah, good.
People don't want robots and people who haven't lived a life as a Prime Minister. They want someone who's human, who's normal, who does indiscretions, who has, you know, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future.
Would you vote for Boris?
No.
You see, now I thought he was going to say he would vote for Boris, all that charm he has to offer, but on reflection, the answer was no. Simon, it does look like British society, at least in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea and Whitechapel, are a little bit more forgiving than you'd give them credit for.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's interesting because it reflects sort of the dichotomy of his political career, doesn't it? I think that he is credited more with having been a success as the Mayor of London, despite the obvious bumps in the road, the acquisition of those water cannon that were then unusable on the streets of London, the attempt to build the Garden Bridge across the River Thames that cost the taxpayer millions and millions of dollars. But the positive side of his record, I think, outweighs all of that as Mayor of London. And yet as Foreign Secretary, I mean, he was essentially created Foreign Secretary by Theresa May because she decided it was more important to have him inside the tent than outside the tent. She simply didn't trust him. And while she may have briefed against him during his time as Foreign Secretary, he was never for her the obvious choice. There were political reasons for putting him there because she didn't entirely trust him.
Freddie, some people will say, actually, Boris's great triumph is in PR. He actually made people forget all his failings and actually his serious infractions in both in politics and in journalism, and that's why they love him. They just remember him for his hair and his charm.
I think that is why they love him, and I think also people love him because if you like, the journalistic class, the pundit class, obviously hate him so much. And I think one of the reasons, you know, we as journalists, we're very jealous, bitter people. And I think a lot of people who are now very high up in journalism are his peers. And they are perhaps a little jealous of the fact that he has glided to the top of British politics so quickly, where they are stuck in boring old journalism.
Well, Mohammed, I mean, the Conservative Party used to be just that, conservative, and it had conservative views. What's happened?
I campaigned for Boris in both 2008 and 2012 in the campaigns for Mayor of London, and part of the time was spent apologising for and explaining away some of his past racist comments, such as Piccadillys with watermelon smiles. As Mayor of London, he was a reasonably effective Mayor of London. He created an air of optimism. He was a good representative for the city on the global stage. And when he got stuck on a slip wire, it was actually quite entertaining and fine. We like colourful characters in the UK, but having been a reasonably competent Mayor of London does not excuse the increasing separation from truth that Boris has suffered from.
Mohammed, you mentioned accusations of racism. Actually, some Muslims, as we heard in that report, think he's Islamophobic. He has, for example, compared women wearing burqas to letterboxes and has talked negatively about the prospect of Turkey joining the EU. Boris, though, thinks he has an answer to such accusations.
I would just say this to our friend from Bristol, that when my Muslim great-grandfather came to this country in fear of his life in 1912, he did so because he knew it was a place that was a beacon of generosity and openness and a willingness to welcome people from around the world.
Back to Mohammed then. Mohammed, that's a good enough reason, isn't it, to give him a free pass on all Muslim issues, given that his great-grandfather is a Muslim, as we've just found out?
Boris likes to trot out his great-grandfather who was a Muslim on occasions when it suits him. It did not stop him telling clear lies during the 2016 referendum campaign saying that Turkey is joining the European Union and that there's nothing that the UK can do to stop it, when he knew that under the treaties, the UK and every other EU country has an absolute veto on the admission of any new members. It's rather like when people say, some of my best friends are Jews.
Freddie, it did look rather forced in the debate when this, as you say, libertine starts to bring up his Muslim great-grandfather being proud of him.
It did. I couldn't help feeling that line had been fed to him beforehand as a way of getting out of that tricky question. And he didn't look very convinced as he said it.
No. Look, Simon, there was a gentleman in our report who said he's a bad man. He's like Trump. He doesn't like Muslims. How much do they overlap ideologically and in terms of personality?
Well, I think they overlap definitely in terms of personality, and I think in many ways the question facing Britain's Conservative Party now is the same as the question facing America's Republican Party. Just how much of your own credibility, how much of your own political ideology are you going to allow Boris Johnson in the UK or Donald Trump here in the United States to run away with? And I think it's a very big decision that Conservatives have to make, given that no one here on this panel can identify exactly what Boris Johnson's plan is to deal with the central political issue in the UK, namely Brexit.
Simon, thank you for that. Well, unlike Donald Trump, Boris doesn't need to win a general election as his party is already in government. He just needs their support. That's the parliamentary system. Is it democratic? Depends on who you ask.
Grueling rounds of voting have whittled down the Conservative MPs vying for the top job. Only the strongest candidates remain. It's now down to you to decide who becomes the next Prime Minister of the UK.
Yes, down to you, but only if you're a member of the Conservative Party. And at last count, just 124,000 people are. That means just barely 1/4% of voting-age Brits will decide who will be the next Prime Minister. It is a small group and not very representative of the population as a whole. They tend to be older, a little wealthier, and live in the south. Here's the breakdown. The average age then is 57. More than half of the membership is older than 60. The majority of members by far are male, and most are middle class and live in the more affluent south of England. Candidates now have around 4 weeks to impress these members before the postal votes are tallied. Yeah, no fancy apps here, and a new Prime Minister will be declared in late July. But don't expect an upset. A recent survey revealed that more than 3/4 of members think you-know-who would make the best leader. So the whole country is in the hands of the Tory membership, and the only Tory on this panel is Mohammed Amin. Mohammed, do you feel a bit guilty that you're able to choose the next leader and the rest of the country isn't?
I don't feel guilty. These are the rules, and everybody in the country is free to join a political party. It's too late now, of course, but I've always encouraged people to stand up for their beliefs and to join the political party of their choice, because one of the things that you get with political parties is a vote about who the leader of that party will be.
Yeah, Simon, coming up to you, you probably remember that when Gordon Brown, the Labour leader, took over from Tony Blair without an election, Boris was all for an election then.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and that's another example of Boris Johnson being ready to tack according to political circumstances. I mean, from an American perspective, I think certainly at the White House, we know they are salivating about the prospect of a Boris Johnson victory. Donald Trump, on numerous occasions in the past, although not in the immediate last few days, has thrown his weight firmly behind Boris Johnson as a possible future prime minister. And remember, we've got a president of the United States who lost the popular vote but won in the Electoral College. So, democracy cuts in some interesting ways.
Yes, but Simon, he said if he knew it was the other way around and that the popular vote was necessary, he would have campaigned differently and won that. Anyway, moving on. Freddie, you think there should be an election, or will he have legitimacy when if he wins this contest?
Well, I think he said that he regards Brexit as an unstoppable crisis that he has to deal with. And once he's dealt with it, he'll look to call a general election as quickly as possible. I think that's not inconsistent with what he said in the past. And as for British parliamentary democracy, I mean, it may not be ideal, but it's held up pretty well. And actually, so is American democracy when you look at other authoritarian regimes around the world.
True. Thank you, Freddie. Now, for many commentators and spectators, Boris's great power is his charm. But perhaps he possesses an even greater force. So that's it. He's got the force. And may the force be with all our guests as well. Simon Marks, Mohammed Amin, and Freddie, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for watching. Remember, you can see this and all our previous episodes on our YouTube channel. But for now, though, goodbye and see you next week.